Picture yourself as the President of the United States. You are alone in the quiet of the Oval Office, the weight of history in the air around you. Your gaze is fixed not on a person, but on an object, a large, detailed map of the world. As you study the familiar contours of continents and oceans, a cold, unsettling realization begins to form in your mind. Your rivals are not standing still. They are moving, advancing, securing positions in a new, unfolding frontier. Meanwhile, the planet itself is changing. The permanent ice is retreating, and in doing so, it is exposing a massive, frozen blind spot sitting right in America's strategic backyard, the island of Greenland. In this moment of calculation, you do not reach for a diplomatic cable. You do not convene a committee. You do what a nation built on deal-making might instinctively consider. You pick up the secure phone, call the Prime Minister of Denmark, and ask the most direct question of all: how much would it cost? When news broke in 2019 that President Donald Trump had floated the idea of purchasing Greenland, the global reaction was a chorus of disbelief and mockery. International media treated the notion as a surreal fever dream, a bizarre distraction from more conventional politics. The Danish government, caught off guard, called the idea absurd and an affront to Greenland's status. Late-night television hosts enjoyed a week of effortless comedy material. But in the frantic, meme-fueled frenzy that followed, a profound and serious truth was lost to most of the world. Donald Trump was not the first American leader to harbor this ambition. He was not even the second. The historical record shows he was actually the third sitting U.S. president to seriously explore the acquisition of Greenland. For more than a century and a half, the idea has simmered within the strategic halls of American power, from quiet discussions in the aftermath of the Alaska Purchase in the 1860s to a formal, stunningly concrete offer of $100 million in gold made by President Harry Truman in 1946. The ambition has persisted, surfacing generation after generation. The driving force behind this fixation is not ego or whimsy. It is a cold calculus of national interest. It is about the staggering mineral wealth trapped beneath the ice. It is about irreplaceable military positioning in a world where the shortest path between superpowers is over the North Pole. It is about controlling the geopolitical chessboard of the Arctic as the planet warms and transforms it from a frozen wasteland into a center of global commerce and conflict. Today, we are setting aside partisan politics. We are looking beyond the headlines and the laughter. We are examining the greatest, most ambitious real estate deal that never happened, and uncovering the powerful, enduring reasons why the United States, from its deepest security institutions, remains fixated on making it a reality. This is the story of a quiet, century-long obsession. Welcome to the opening chapters of the Arctic Cold War. It is crucial to understand, this did not begin with a modern tweet. To grasp the depth of America's fixation on Greenland, you must travel back in time to an era of steam engines and telegraph wires, when the map was still seen as something to be expanded, and acquiring territory was a standard tool of statecraft. The idea did not pop out of thin air in 2019. It is woven into the very fabric of American strategic thinking. Our story starts in the year 1867. The United States, still healing from the Civil War, is looking outward. The nation's ambitious Secretary of State, William Seward, has just engineered the purchase of a vast, remote territory called Alaska from the Russian Empire. The price is $7.2 million. Immediately, critics in Congress and the press savage the deal, labeling it Seward's folly and Seward's icebox. They see it as a worthless expanse of frozen tundra. But Seward's vision stretches far beyond the Alaskan coast. He is thinking in terms of empires and oceans. He commissions confidential studies within the State Department to explore the potential acquisition of two other North Atlantic landmasses, Iceland and Greenland. His logic is brutally straightforward and strategic for the 19th century. Control the key choke points of the North Atlantic, dominate the vital sea lanes between Europe and North America. The ambitions became the best of seeing the American missions, movements, and remains. Now fast forward 8 decades. The year is 1946. The cataclysm of World War II has just ended. The cities of Europe are shattered, and from the ashes a new and formidable rival has emerged, the Soviet Union. In Washington, President Harry Truman and his military advisors are planning for the next war, which they believe will be fought not in trenches, but in the skies. They understand that the shortest route for long-range bombers between the Soviet heartland and the cities of North America is directly over the Arctic Circle. And sitting squarely in the middle of that polar pathway is the massive island of Greenland. So, President Truman makes a move that today seems astonishing. He authorizes a formal, top-secret offer to the government of Denmark. The United States offers to buy Greenland. The price, $100 million. But this is not an offer of paper money or bonds. The offer is for $100 million in gold bullion, physical, tangible wealth. For the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Greenland was described in internal memos as indispensable to the safety of the United States. It was envisioned as a giant, unsinkable aircraft carrier and radar platform, the essential interception point for any Soviet bomber fleet. Without it, America's northern approaches were dangerously exposed. Denmark, a proud and sovereign ally, considered the offer and then politely, firmly declined. They were not interested in selling a part of their kingdom. But the United States did not simply walk away. It changed tactics with the pragmatism of a superpower. If America could not buy the house, it would secure a permanent, unshakable lease on the most important rooms. In 1951, after intense negotiation, the two nations signed a landmark defense agreement. This treaty granted the United States permanent, virtually unrestricted military access to Greenland. It led to the establishment and expansion of Thule Air Base, a strategic foothold of immense importance that the U.S. military maintains to this very day. So, when the headlines exploded in 2019, many in the Pentagon, the State Department, and the intelligence community were not laughing. They were nodding with a sense of historical recognition. The idea to them was not absurd. It was a continuation of a long-standing strategic thread. And this thread is supported by a clear historical precedent. Denmark has, in fact, sold territory to the United States before. In 1917, facing economic strain and strategic reassessment during World War I, Denmark sold the Danish West Indies to America for $25 million in gold. Those islands are known today as the U.S. Virgin Islands. The precedent for such a transaction is not theoretical. It is historical, documented, and sits in the Caribbean Sea. To understand the relentless military logic behind the Greenland fixation, you must look at the map not as you did in a school classroom, but as a naval admiral or an Air Force general does. On a flat, rectangular map, Greenland often appears as a distorted white blob floating disconnected at the top of the page. But if you look at a globe, or better yet, a top-secret naval strategy chart, its true importance snaps into shocking clarity. You see it not as an island, but as the western pillar of one of the most critical military choke points on Earth, the GIUK Gap. GIUK is a sober military acronym. It stands for Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom. This is the narrow oceanic corridor that separates the Greenland and Norwegian seas from the open Atlantic Ocean. For naval strategists, it is a gateway and a trap. Imagine the scenario from the perspective of a Russian Navy commander. Your most advanced nuclear-armed submarines are based in ports on the Arctic coast, near Murmansk. Your mission is to deploy these silent, deadly vessels into the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, where they could hold the entire eastern seaboard of North America at risk. To reach that open water from your Arctic bases, you have very few practical options. In most realistic scenarios, you must guide your submarine through one of the tight passages of the GIUK Gap, squeezing through the waters between Greenland and Iceland, or between Iceland and the United Kingdom. For NATO, this corridor is not open water. It is a monitored and fortified kill zone. For decades, it has been saturated with a dense, multi-layered network of surveillance. This includes sophisticated underwater hydrophone arrays on the seafloor, patrolling maritime patrol aircraft like the P-8 Poseidon, a constellation of reconnaissance satellites, and decades of accumulated acoustic intelligence on every sound a submarine might make. Controlling the GIUK Gap means controlling the flow of naval power between the Arctic and the Atlantic. Greenland is the western wall of that gate. If Greenland, through some shift in politics or influence, ever fell under the control or even the significant sway of a hostile power, the entire security of the GIUK Gap would be critically compromised. That rival power could base aircraft, deploy sensors, or interfere with surveillance operations, making the gate far harder to secure. This is the foundational concept behind calling Greenland an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Naval aircraft carriers are powerful, but they are vulnerable. They can be sunk. An island cannot. Control of Greenland provides a permanent, immovable platform for hosting powerful long-range radar, forward-based fighter jets, intelligence-gathering sensors, and early warning missile defense systems. It is a fortress positioned directly on the front line between North America, Europe, and Russia. In military strategy, distance is not just geography, it is time, and time is the most precious commodity in a crisis. The distance between a missile silo in Moscow and the city of Washington, D.C. is roughly 5,000 miles. From the northernmost tip of Greenland, the distance to Moscow is barely over 2,000 miles. This geographical fact compresses warning time from potentially 30 minutes to less than 15. It amplifies American leverage and shrinks a rival's options. This is why the GIUK Gap, a Cold War flashpoint, is becoming fiercely active again. Russian submarines are now quieter, more capable, and operating more persistently in the North Atlantic than at any time since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, consider the strategic simplicity of ownership. If the United States actually owned Greenland as sovereign territory, countless diplomatic and logistical hurdles would vanish overnight. There would be no need for delicate negotiations with Copenhagen to extend a runway, to deploy a new radar system, or to upgrade missile tracking infrastructure. It would be American soil. The legal and political friction that slows military adaptation would disappear, allowing the U.S. to rapidly transform Greenland into a permanently hardened, forward defense zone in the high Arctic. The appeal of this simplicity to military planners is immense. Let us now move from the realm of missiles and submarines to the world of economics and technology. If you find yourself wondering why a nation or a president with a real estate background would look at a frozen island and see an asset, you need look no further than the device in your pocket, the car in your driveway, or the precision weapon system in a military arsenal. Greenland's value is not only on its surface, but deep beneath the ice. It is, in essence, a massive, natural vault of strategic materials, and the key to that vault is now melting. As the Greenland ice sheet retreats year after year, it is revealing not just rock, but staggering geological wealth. Modern surveys have confirmed the island sits atop some of the largest known deposits of rare earth elements on the planet. One site in particular, called Kvanefjeld in southern Greenland, is considered a geological giant. It is routinely described as one of the largest undeveloped rare earth deposits outside of China. The term rare earth is a misnomer. These 17 metallic elements are not particularly rare in the Earth's crust. What makes them critical is that they are brutally difficult and environmentally toxic to mine, separate, and refine into usable forms. Yet, our entire modern technological civilization has become addicted to them. They are the secret ingredients. The powerful miniaturized magnets in your smartphone speaker and vibration motor are made with rare earths. The high-performance motors that drive electric vehicles depend on them. The guidance systems in cruise missiles, the stealth technology on fighter jets, the satellites orbiting overhead, and the advanced radars and warships, all of them are built with and depend on rare earth elements. This creates a strategic nightmare for Washington. Today, China controls a staggering 80% to 90% of the global supply chain for processing these critical materials. Even when rare earth ores are mined in other countries, in Australia or California or elsewhere, the raw material is almost always shipped to China for the complex, dirty work of separation and refinement. This gives Beijing a potential stranglehold over vast sectors of Western manufacturing, green energy technology, and most alarmingly, defense production. If China decided to restrict exports for political reasons, the production lines for everything from electric cars to F-35 fighter jets could grind to a halt within months. Greenland represents one of the few realistic large-scale opportunities to break this dangerous monopoly and diversify the global supply chain. Preliminary estimates suggest the Kvanefjeld deposit alone may contain well over 1 million metric tons of rare earth oxides, including the most critical elements like neodymium for powerful magnets and dysprosium for high-temperature stability. But here is the uncomfortable twist that should send a chill down the spine of any Western strategist. While American politicians and pundits were busy joking about the idea of buying Greenland, a Chinese company was moving with quiet, decisive purpose. A firm named Shanghai Resources, partially state-owned, acquired a major ownership stake in the Australian mining company that holds the critical development rights to the Kvanefjeld deposit. This move did not make global headlines, but its implications are profound. It gives China a direct, influential seat at the table for one of the most strategically important mineral projects on the planet. Therefore, the American desire to buy Greenland is not merely about expansionist ambition, It is increasingly seen as a defensive, preemptive move. It is about preventing a geopolitical rival from gaining a dominant position over the raw materials that will power the next industrial and technological era. When Washington looks at Greenland's ice, it does not just see frozen water. It sees a critical supply chain vulnerability, and that vulnerability is currently being written in Mandarin. If you believe the US government has always treated Greenland with the straightforward respect due to a close ally's sovereign land, prepare for a story that feels like science fiction. It is a ghost story from the Cold War, about a place called Camp Century, and it reveals the lengths to which America has already gone to weaponize the Greenland ice. In 1959, a convoy of USB Army Corps of Engineers transports arrived on the remote northwest coast of Greenland. They came with a public, friendly story for their Danish allies. They were there to build a pioneering scientific research station inside the ice sheet itself, a noble effort to study Arctic weather, ice core samples, and the secrets of the glacier. Denmark agreed to the project in the spirit of allied scientific cooperation. What the Americans actually built was something far more extraordinary and clandestine. Over 2 years, using giant rotary snow cutters, they carved out a series of tunnels and caverns under the surface of the ice. They created a hidden, functioning underground sea they named Camp Century. It had prefabricated buildings housing living quarters, a mess hall, a hospital, a chapel, a library, and even a movie theater. At its peak, it housed around 200 military and scientific personnel. Its power source was one of the world's first portable military nuclear reactors, buried under the snow. The public cover story was science. The true, classified mission had a different name: Project Iceworm. The plan, once fully developed, was so audacious, it seems ripped from a spy novel. The US Army envisioned using Camp Century as merely a test site. The ultimate goal was to carve a sprawling, hidden network of tunnels, thousands of miles long, beneath the central Greenland ice sheet. Inside this frozen labyrinth, they would hide a fleet of mobile, nuclear-armed missiles on railway tracks. The missiles would be constantly shuttled from one hiding place to another, making it impossible for Soviet satellites or spies to track their location or destroy them in a first strike. Greenland would become an invulnerable, hidden nuclear fortress. There was, however, a fatal flaw in the plan that its brilliant engineers tragically underestimated. Ice is alive. It flows. It deforms. It is not a static, stable medium like rock. Within a few years, the constant, immense pressure of the moving glacier began to warp the tunnels of Camp Century. Walls bulged, ceilings shifted and cracked. The endless maintenance to keep the tunnels open became a losing battle. By the mid-1960s, the Pentagon quietly admitted Project Iceworm was a technological fantasy. Camp Century was abandoned in 1967. The nuclear reactor core was removed, but in the rushed decommissioning, a darker legacy was left behind. The military made a fateful assumption that the ice would remain permanently frozen, acting as a natural tomb. They left tens of thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, polychlorinated biphenyl, PCB-contaminated materials, radioactive coolant water, and general waste buried deep within the ice tunnels. That core assumption is now collapsing alongside the climate. As Arctic temperatures rise at an alarming rate, scientific models warn that the burial site of Camp Century could reach the melting point within the next century. If that happens, decades of trapped chemical and low-level radioactive waste could be released into the local meltwater and ecosystem, creating a slow-motion environmental disaster. Today, America's presence in Greenland is far less secretive, but infinitely more strategically central. The installation, once known as Thule Air Base, has been renamed Pitafik Space Base. It is the northernmost USS military installation on Earth and a cornerstone of national defense. It hosts some of the most powerful early warning radars in the world, operated by the U.S. Space Force's 12th Space Warning Squadron. These radars scan the polar skies continuously, 24 hours a day, watching for the telltale heat signature of ballistic missile launches from anywhere across the Northern Hemisphere. This base is a critical pillar in America's missile defense architecture. If U.S. access to this base were ever compromised or politicized, the early warning shield over the Arctic would develop a catastrophic blind spot. From Washington's strategic perspective, owning Greenland would not just simplify diplomacy, it would permanently and irrevocably lock down control of one of the most sensitive, valuable, and irreplaceable pieces of military real estate on the planet. We now arrive at the darkest, most ironic twist in this 21st century story. The same force that represents an existential crisis for humanity, human-caused climate change, is simultaneously unlocking a potential gold rush of global commercial and military opportunity in the Arctic. For all of recorded history, the Arctic Ocean has been a frozen, impassable barrier. No container ship could cross it. If you wanted to move goods from the factories of Shanghai to the markets of Rotterdam, you had no choice but to take the long southern route through the crowded South China Sea, across the pirate-prone Indian Ocean, up through the narrow, vulnerable Suez Canal, and across the Mediterranean. That journey typically takes 30 to 40 days. But as the Arctic ice cover shrinks and thins, new maritime highways are opening. The most advanced is Russia's Northern Sea Route, which hugs the lengthy Siberian coastline. In the peak of the summer season, this route can cut the Asia to Europe transit time by 10 to 15 days, a reduction of 25% to 35%. For global shipping companies, the fuel savings and increased delivery speed can translate to billions of dollars annually. Looking to the future, an even more dramatic shortcut may become viable: the Transpolar Sea Route. This would be a direct line cut straight across the central Arctic Ocean, bypassing national coastlines entirely. It is not reliably open yet, but military and commercial planners are already drawing the maps for it. Greenland does not sit directly on these routes, but it sits adjacent to their crucial gateways. It commands the western approaches to these emerging sea lanes. The nation or entity that builds the necessary supporting infrastructure, the deep-water ports, the refueling stations, the repair yards, the search and rescue bases, the communication hubs, will effectively become the logistical manager and toll collector for the future Arctic economy. China has not been shy about its ambitions here. It officially calls this vision the Polar Silk Road, integrating it into its massive Belt and Road initiative. Beijing sees Arctic shipping as a faster, more secure way to move its goods into Europe, diversifying away from vulnerable choke points like the Strait of Malacca and the Suez Canal. Russia is already capitalizing on its geography, charging transit fees, providing mandatory icebreaker escorts, and selling navigation services along its Arctic coast. Here is the pressing reality for Greenland. This game-changing infrastructure barely exists on the island today. There are few ports capable of handling large commercial vessels, limited emergency response capabilities, and minimal shipping services. Building this network from scratch requires staggering capital investment, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. If the Kingdom of Denmark cannot or will not fund it, and if the United States hesitates, the field is open. And there is one nation that walks the world with an unrivaled infrastructure checkbook, one that specializes in funding major projects in strategically located countries. That nation's name, of course, rhymes with China. Owning Greenland would not give the United States legal control over international shipping lanes, which are governed by maritime law, but it would grant Washington enormous influence over the practical reality of those routes. Control of the ports, the logistics hubs, the security footprint, and the commercial flow would allow America to shape the rules of the new Arctic Ocean. So, when you hear about melting glaciers, do not just think of polar bears and rising seas. Think of new blue water highways, new deep-sea ports, and a quiet, high-stakes race to decide who gets to set up the toll booths on tomorrow's most important trade routes. How to buy a country without buying it. Let us now move from grand strategy to the subtle, long-term game being played in the corridors of power. While the public and media laughed at the notion of Trump literally writing a check for Greenland, serious policymakers in Washington were, and are, focused on a much more nuanced and likely strategy. It can be called the independence trap. To understand this, you must first understand Greenland's unique political status today. It is not a colony, but a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. It has its own parliament, the Inatsisartut, its own government, Naalakkersuit, its own language, Greenlandic, and control over virtually all domestic policy areas like education, health, and resources. However, its citizens carry Danish passports, and crucially, the realms of foreign policy, defense, and ultimate constitutional authority still reside in Copenhagen, nearly 2,000 miles away. Public opinion polls conducted in Greenland consistently show a powerful cultural current. A strong majority of Greenlanders, often between 60% and 80%, support the principle of full independence. The dream of becoming a sovereign nation is a powerful and legitimate force in Greenlandic society. But there is a catch, a massive financial catch. Every single year, the Danish government sends Greenland a direct block grant. This subsidy is roughly 4 billion Danish kroner, which converts to about $600 million US dollars. This single transfer is not a minor line item. It is the lifeblood of the Greenlandic economy. It covers more than half of the entire public budget of Greenland and accounts for about 1/5 of its total gross domestic product (GDP). This Danish money pays for hospitals, schools, teacher salaries, social services, and basic infrastructure. Without it, Greenland's economy would immediately contract by 20%, leading to severe austerity, plummeting living standards, and likely a rapid exodus of its small population. This creates the trap. Greenland cannot afford to be independent unless someone else steps in to replace the Danish subsidy. This is where the American strategy undergoes a sophisticated shift. It moves from the blunt idea of purchasing land to the more subtle art of purchasing influence and alliance. The long-term play is this: if and when Greenland's population finally votes for full independence, the Danish money will stop. The newborn nation will face an immediate, desperate financial crisis. In that moment of vulnerability, the first outside power to arrive with a comprehensive package of replacement funding, massive infrastructure investment, and security guarantees will become the new, dominant partner in Greenland's future. If the United States were to be that power, offering a strategic partnership that ensures economic stability in exchange for expanded, permanent military access and preferential rights to mineral and logistical development, Washington would gain enormous strategic leverage for what would be, in the grand scheme of the U.S. federal budget, a relatively modest annual cost. We are already seeing the early, careful groundwork for this scenario being laid. In 2020, the United States took a significant symbolic and practical step. It reopened a consulate in NUK, Greenland's capital, for the first time since the 1950s. Alongside this diplomatic presence came a direct U.S. aid package of $1 million aimed at business development, education, and sustainable infrastructure projects. On the surface, Denmark publicly welcomed this engagement with an ally. Privately, however, reports suggest Danish officials were deeply uneasy. It was seen as Washington establishing a permanent, influential foothold inside what had long been considered Copenhagen's exclusive strategic backyard. The unspoken message to Greenlanders was clear: you don't necessarily need your old partner anymore. When you're ready, we are here, and we can take care of you. The risk for the United States in this game is hesitation. If America is slow or politically unwilling to make such a commitment to an independent Greenland, another power is standing by, checkbook in hand, often offering financing with fewer questions about governance or human rights. That power is China. The real race, therefore, is not necessarily to buy the land in a single transaction. It is a more patient race to position oneself as the indispensable economic and security partner of a future sovereign Greenland. What is the Zillow estimate? For a moment, let us fully indulge the fantasy. Let us imagine a world where diplomatic stars align. The government in Copenhagen has a change of heart. The parliament in Nuuk agrees to the transfer. The U.S. Congress is ready to appropriate the funds. The question then becomes, what is the price tag? How do you value 836,000 square miles of ice, rock, mineral wealth, and strategic dominance? Historical offers provide a starting point, but not a realistic one. President Truman's 1946 offer of $100 million in gold would be worth about $6 billion in today's money. To put that in perspective, that is less than what Facebook paid for the Instagram app in 2012. It is an insultingly low figure for a landmass 1/4 the size of the continental United States. When the story broke in 2019, analysts at publications like the Financial Times and major investment banks actually tried to run serious numbers. They modeled different valuation scenarios, factoring in discounted future cash flows for mineral extraction, the imputed strategic military value, comparing it to annual defense budgets, and land value comparisons to other remote regions. These complex models pushed estimates toward the trillion-dollar range, somewhere around $1 trillion, depending on the assumptions about resource prices and discount rates. Another crude method is the Alaska model. The U.S. bought Alaska for $2 million in 1867, which is about $129 million in today's dollars, or roughly 2 cents per acre. Applying that same per acre price to Greenland yields a comically low figure in the tens of millions. A useless exercise that ignores a century and a half of inflation, strategic scarcity, and resource discovery. A more realistic lens is to treat Greenland not as empty land, but as a distressed sovereign asset with massive upside potential. Using this framework, which includes its proven mineral resources, rare earths, iron ore, rubies, oil and gas potential, and its irreplaceable strategic location, analysts could justify valuations anywhere from $200 billion to $500 billion. And that is before detailed exploration might reveal even greater wealth. To contextualize these staggering numbers, $500 billion is in the same ballpark as what the United States spends annually just on servicing the interest of its national debt. It is comparable to the total lifetime cost of developing the F-35 fighter jet program. It is less than the market capitalization of a single company like Tesla. In the eyes of some strategists, for the price of one Elon Musk enterprise, the United States could theoretically secure dominance over the entire Arctic basin for generations to come. But here is the catch that breaks any simple calculator. You are not just buying land. You are acquiring a society and assuming colossal ongoing liabilities. When the U.S. bought the Virgin Islands in 1917, it bought the land and took on responsibility for its people, who eventually gained U.S. citizenship. If Greenland became U.S. territory, its approximately 57,000 residents would likely follow a similar path, gaining territorial status and eventual full citizenship rights. This would entitle them to federal support for healthcare, education, and social security. The infrastructure bill alone would be astronomically expensive. Greenland has no road network connecting its towns and settlements. You literally cannot drive from GIUK to any other major community. Transportation is entirely by expensive air travel or seasonal boat. Building a modern transportation, energy, and digital infrastructure across such a vast, harsh territory would cost trillions of dollars over many decades. So, the theoretical purchase price is nearly the down payment. The renovation and maintenance costs for this new piece of American territory would dwarf the initial investment. Yet, supporters of the idea argue the cost of the alternative is incalculably higher. What is the price of losing Arctic dominance to China or Russia? What is the cost of allowing a rival to control access to the North Atlantic? What is the economic and security toll of losing the global race for the minerals that will power the 21st century economy? From this perspective, a $1 trillion investment over time begins to sound less like insanity and more like a prudent, if breathtakingly bold, insurance policy for American primacy. A story in 3 runes. While the capitals of Washington, Copenhagen, and Beijing play a high-stakes game of risk with maps and spreadsheets, it is vital to remember the real people who live on that map. For the 56,000 inhabitants of Greenland, this is not a theoretical geopolitical exercise. It is their home, their culture, and their future. Their story adds a profound layer of tragedy and complexity to the cold calculus of strategy. To understand why Greenland is both resilient and vulnerable, you must look at its recent wounds. Wound 1, the Little Danes experiment. In 1951, the Danish government launched a well-intentioned but devastating social experiment. They selected 22 Greenlandic Inuit children, some orphans, many not, and removed them from their families and communities. The children were sent to Denmark to be re-educated. The goal was to culturally modernize them, teach them fluent Danish, integrate them into Danish society, and then return them to Greenland as a new elite who would lead their society into the modern world. It was social engineering disguised as opportunity. The result was catastrophic. When the children returned, many no longer spoke their native Greenlandic. They felt like foreigners in their own homeland, trapped between 2 worlds. Many struggled profoundly with identity, leading to issues of addiction, mental illness, isolation, and early death. Family and cultural lines were fractured. It was not until 2022 that the Danish government issued a formal, official apology and offered financial compensation. But an apology cannot erase generational trauma. This episode seeded a deep and enduring distrust of foreign powers who come promising improvement and partnership. Rune 2, the silent epidemic. Walk through the streets of GIUK or any of the smaller settlements, and you will see posters with a simple, heartbreaking message. The call is free. No one is alone. These are not advertisements for a telecom company. They are advertisements for suicide prevention hotlines. Greenland has one of the highest suicide rates in the world per capita, tragically concentrated among its young men. This crisis is a symptom of profound social distress. The long months of winter darkness, the historical trauma of cultural disruption, the intense isolation of remote communities, the rapid pace of modernization, and a severe lack of accessible mental health care infrastructure. It is a quiet, persistent emergency that touches nearly every family on the island. When politicians in faraway capitals casually talk about buying Greenland, they are not talking about empty terrain. They are talking about a population that is hurting, proud, resilient, and deeply sensitive to being treated as a commodity or a pawn. Wound 3. The Vanishing Dogs. For over 4,000 years, the partnership between the Inuit hunter and the Greenlandic sled dog was the foundation of survival in the Arctic. The dogs were not pets. They were essential partners for transportation and hunting across the sea ice. That ancient bond is now breaking, and the reason is directly underfoot: the disappearing ice. As the sea ice forms later in the fall and melts earlier in the spring, the traditional hunting seasons for seals and other marine mammals have collapsed in many regions. Without successful hunting, there is no abundant free source of seal meat to feed large dog teams. Imported commercial dog food is prohibitively expensive in remote settlements. Faced with this impossible choice, many hunters have been forced to make a heartbreaking decision: to euthanize the dog teams their families have cared for generations. Over the past 2 decades, Greenland's sled dog population has declined by an estimated 40 to 50%. This is not just a change in lifestyle. It is the visceral, living symbol of a culture caught violently between two worlds. The old Arctic way of life, dictated by ice and tradition, is fading. The promised new economy of mining, shipping, and tourism has not yet fully arrived to replace it. The people are living in this difficult, uncertain transition, from idea to brinkmanship. If you believe this story concluded with the laughter of 2019, you have not been paying attention to the relentless tide of geopolitics. What began as a moment of diplomatic awkwardness has, in the years since, escalated into a state of serious strategic brinkmanship that has brought the world to a tense moment in early 2026. In January of 2026, the White House confirmed through official channels that President Donald Trump and his national security team are not just idly considering Greenland. They are actively exploring a wide range of options for securing American interests there. The language used has hardened significantly. In a press briefing, a spokesperson stated that the administration is looking at everything from a negotiated acquisition to dramatically expanded security agreements. Most alarmingly, the spokesperson framed the utilization of the U.S. military as always an option available to the commander-in-chief, explicitly placing it on the table as one tool among many. This statement sent immediate shockwaves through European capitals. Denmark, a fellow NATO member and a decades-old ally, reacted with swift firmness. The Danish government reaffirmed in the strongest possible terms that Greenland is not for sale and that its sovereignty and the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark must be respected fully. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, alongside other European leaders, issued sharp warnings. They stated that any suggestion of using force or coercion to change the status of Greenland would undermine the very foundations of the post-World War II international order and the rules-based system that NATO is built upon. It is critical to be precise about what is and is not happening. The U.S. administration has not mobilized warships or invasion forces toward Greenland. Copenhagen has not consented to any transfer of sovereignty. What has changed dramatically is the tone and the official framing. The idea has moved from a sideline curiosity to a formally cited national security priority by U.S. officials, directly linked to their broader concerns about Russian militarization and Chinese economic encroachment in the Arctic. Some U.S. stock lawmakers have tried to frame this aggressive rhetoric as a form of intense pressure on Denmark to come to the negotiating table, not as a legitimate threat of invasion. Officials like the Secretary of State have emphasized that the administration's goal remains a diplomatic resolution, though they have conspicuously refused to rule out other avenues entirely. The political backlash is growing, both internationally and at home. Key European allies like France, Germany, and Canada have publicly lined up behind Denmark, reiterating support for Greenland's current sovereignty arrangements. They warned that any coercive move by the United States would create a severe crisis within NATO and set a dangerous precedent that could destabilize international law globally. What this all means is that we are witnessing a dramatic geopolitical escalation that falls just short of traditional armed conflict for now. The stakes, however, could not be higher. Permanent strategic access to the Arctic, control of critical minerals, and future shipping routes. and the fate of a territory that has been under Danish sovereignty for over 300 years. Whether this tense standoff evolves into a genuine crisis or recedes back into diplomacy remains to be seen. But for the first time in decades, the language surrounding Greenland is unmistakably the language of power, confrontation, and national destiny. The melting frontier. So, why does the United States want to buy Greenland? The simplistic answer is, it does not just want more ice. The deeper, more accurate answer is that the fundamental map of global power and commerce is being physically redrawn by climate change, and America is determined not to be left behind. For 500 years, following the Age of Discovery, the Atlantic Ocean was the center of the world, the highway of empires. For the last 50 years, strategic and economic focus has pivoted to the Pacific Rim. But there is a compelling case to be made that the next 50 years will be decided in the north, in the Arctic. In this new configuration, Greenland is not a remote outpost. It is the cork in the bottle. It holds the minerals required for our advanced technology. It provides the radar coverage essential for our continental defense. And it holds the geographic keys to the new oceans that are opening at the top of our world. Through different lenses, the major powers see different things. The United States looks at Greenland and sees primarily a shield, a defensive bulwark against rivals, and a platform for power projection. China looks at Greenland and sees a battery, a storehouse of the critical resources needed to fuel its economic and technological ascent. Denmark looks at Greenland and sees a responsibility, a complex historical relationship fraught with past wrongs and a current duty of care. And the Greenlanders themselves? For the most part, they look at their homeland and desire what people everywhere want: stability, dignity, self-determination, and a viable future in which their children can not only survive, but thrive. The central question for the coming decades is no longer whether Greenland will become more valuable. That process is already underway, driven by physics and geology. The urgent, pressing question is how the world will handle that skyrocketing value. Will it be managed through careful diplomacy, mutual agreement, and respect for the people who live there? Will it be managed through economic investment, partnerships, and aid? Or, as the rhetoric of 2026 suggests, will it eventually be contested with the blunt instruments of power politics, coercion, and potentially force? The ice is melting, and as it disappears, it is revealing not just land and resources, but something far more dangerous: the unchanging nature of human ambition, competition, and greed. The race for the Arctic has officially begun. It is a race where the starting pistol was fired not by a person, but by a warming planet. And it is a race where the finish line could determine the balance of power for the next century.